The pilot was making a really awful squealing sound, but it wasn't a constant. It was a chirp, 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 chirp. And as you accelerated, it would kind of, meet the R's and zzz, 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 zzz. And it was really annoying. So that to me says that I've got a idler pulley or tensioner pulley with the bearings going bad. I also had some wear on the outside of my belt, which is an indication of a pulley kind of being off to the side because it wears the side of the belt. So I knew coming into things that I was probably going to need to do a pulley and possibly a tensioner, and I know I needed a new belt anyway, so that's what we're going to be covering today.
Seriously, I just had it.
The tools you'll need for this project are a 3/8 ratchet, a 12mm shallow well and a 3-inch extension, and also a 14mm. You'll also need a new belt. I went with a Dayco. There's the part number there. And since I kind of knew I was going to need it, I went with a tensioner and idler pulley kit. I got these at Advance, and it'll cost you probably around $150 in parts, depending on which ones you go with. Here's the part number for the tensioner kit that I went with. Here we are on the engine side. I've already removed the belt, which you can do with a 14mm, and you just reach down right here onto this pulley, and you pull it back in order to loosen the belt, and then pull it off of the top pulley and then slide the rest off. Now the belt's off, I can kind of check these pulleys for side to side movement, and my lower idler pulley is actually loose and it wiggles back and forth. So that's where my squealing's coming from. So I'm going to replace that pulley. I'm probably going to go to the parts store and just get a whole new tensioner assembly just to be on the safe side and make sure that I'm only doing this once. In order to remove the belt tensioner assembly, you'll take a 14mm on this lower pulley on the bottom side of the tensioner, and you'll remove that. It's a 14mm. And then there's another one that's down low on the bottom side. If memory serves, it's a 12. Next, using a 12mm socket and a 3-inch extension, you want to reach down on the underside of the bottom idler pulley and loosen and take the 12mm bolt out from the bottom side of the tensioner assembly, because you can't get the entire thing off because the bolt that holds the idler pulley in is too long to slide the whole way out unless you jack the motor up. And we're just gonna weasel out the whole tensioner assembly just like that. You wanna keep in mind that this dust shield right here, you're gonna need to reuse that, so make sure you don't lose it. There's also a little spacer here that you'll need to reuse whenever you put things back together if you're putting a new tensioner in. I'm doing both just because, like I said, I don't want to do this twice. But here's our bearing. Yeah, it's definitely got some play in there. So due for replacement. Now we're just going to put our new pulley in, and again, being careful not to lose your little spacer on the bottom. Put that back together with the new pulley and the dust shield in place, and now we can start reassembling. As the tensioner sits in there, right here is where that 12mm bolt sits, so it's kind of a pain in the butt to get to. So now I've got everything back together. I'm just going to weasel this guy back in and line up the lower tensioner pulley bolt with the hole and just get that started in. And once you get that started in, it'll hold the whole assembly in place so that you can get that 12mm bolt put back in there. I've got the 14mm on the idler pulley in there, but I didn't tighten it down the whole way. You can see I can still move the entire assembly back and forth here, and the reason I'm doing that is to make it easier to line up the 12mm bolt on the bottom side. I've got the 12mm bolt on the underside just snugged up, and now that that's snug, before I tighten it down the rest of the way, I'm going to take the 14mm on the bottom idler pulley and tighten it up so that it's good and tight, and then I'll snug up and torque down the 12mm bolt on the bottom side. One thing to keep in mind is you don't need to really force these things in and tighten them down with the force of Zeus. It's easy to strip stuff out and break things if you over tighten stuff. If you're using a torque wrench and you can find the specs on it, that's great, but just don't overdo it. It doesn't take a Herculean effort to get these in and get them tight enough to where they won't come out. Now, this is a J35A9 engine. The belt routing, starting at the crankshaft and going counterclockwise, it goes from the crankshaft around the AC compressor, and then around the idler pulley where that 14mm is, and then over to the alternator, and then it comes up over top to your power steering pump. and then down onto the tensioner pulley itself, and then back down to the crankshaft. Now that we've got our belt back on, I have the 14mm on the tensioner, and I'm going to push back towards the firewall and then slip the belt on over the topside pulley. When you're installing any serpentine belt, you want to make sure that all of the ribs are inside of the ribs on the pulleys if it's ribbed before you crank things over. Now that the belt's installed, we're going to fire things up and just make sure that everything's working and functioning properly, and that we, most importantly, don't have any annoying squeals. Silence is golden. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this video helped you out. If it did, please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.